most other friends I know do not keep in contact with their primary school friends.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're in contact with one or two, but we do quite.
It's a whole year basically.
Yeah.
Again, there are only, what was it, like 8 people in each class.
It's true. I personally always gone to small schools, so I feel as if I'm always going to be in contact with people. I think it helps a lot.
It does. The thing is though, right, I feel like, because I was went up to year 8 as well, I think that mattered a lot.
I wasn't there in year 8 though. I remember I left in year 7. I left a year early, which means I didn't even have that last year with you guys.
True, but I feel like
I was like, fuck that.
The squad
common entrance. I was like, I ain't doing
it was actually so lit, you know.
What, common entrance?
Yeah.
How was it
fun?
fun?
Piss take, mate.
Yeah, for you. It was like the same for me.
Also, it was sick for GCSE, so like, before we had gone to our next schools, we had this whole period of banging out. So when I arrived at like City, I found it so calm, work-wise. Like in geography, I remember I'd done the year's worth of work when I arrived.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I kind of like, for me it was definitely because I didn't want to do common entrance, but I'm not going to lie, I made the excuse that I wanted to start learning Spanish a year earlier, because everyone else was a year ahead.
Did you keep doing it?
Huh?
Did you keep doing it?
Yeah, I did it all the way through, like, essentially the equivalent of like A-level Spanish.
Oh shit.
But I did like, it was like the worst possible verse. It's called ab initio, and it's essentially like you relearn it from the start for 2 years. I actually did quite well, which was like a big shock. I was predicted a 3 and I got a 5 out of 7. So
okay.
it was alright.
Those grades confuse me so much.
Yeah, but you know they've changed. Like the A-level ones now are the same as the
GCSE ones, isn't it?
I don't know how it is, but it's up to 10, isn't it? Or
10 and 9. I know GCSE's 9, but they've changed A-levels.
Have they changed A-levels as well? Is that before you did your A-level? Oh, sorry, after you did yours. Yeah.
I know, like,
so you still had like A and stuff like that?
Yeah, we had A star A,
yeah.
Thing is that I did pre-U at my secondary.
What?
It's another one. So Cambridge pre-U, it's another exam board. So their marks are, you have D1, which is higher than A star, like 90 something %.
Okay.
D2, which is A star equivalent.
Right.
D3, which is roughly an A.
Okay, so it still follows kind of the same.
Yeah. The thing is that they wanted the courses that they thought were better.
Yeah.
So in our school, every single course could choose what exam board it wanted to do.
Okay, sure.
So for some of them,
wow.
Yeah. They can switch whenever they want to.
Confusing. Like administratively, that's like confusing.
A bit, but I think the way they handled it was so good.
Alright.
So yeah, they'd have board meetings and say we want to change from this to this, or they'd review the exam results or people's complaints the year before.
Did you always feel like you had to explain it to people? Like if you spend,
because
I've been explaining what the IB is to people my entire life, because every single time someone says, what A-levels did you do? They don't have a clue about what IB is, and then I'm stuck. I have to explain every single time the same thing.
I do have to explain it, but I think sometimes there's like an advantage in it not being standard grades. It's harder for people to judge you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the problem with IB is it's in someone's head somewhere. It's apparently harder. So when I speak to people about the IB, they go, "Oh, isn't that like really hard?"
Yeah.
And then I'm stuck going, "No, like not." Yeah, it's hard to do well, but it's like I don't do well. And then there's all this preconception. It's like the same thing when people say they do BTECs. It's immediately there's a preconception about what.
Yeah, that's easier.
Yeah, that it's easier.
But I've always heard IB is hard though. But that's from me speaking to people.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I think that like I say, the IB is harder to get those higher grade levels. But I think to achieve the average is, I'd say, just because the stages before the IB, right, before diploma, is like MYP, and it's so much easier than GCSE.
You're gonna have to break them down for me, mate. MYP.
MYP, middle years program. So that's the GCSE equivalent.
Okay,
right. So diploma is the A-level equivalent, and the GCSE equivalent is MYP. Yeah, it's all a bit mad, and it's not, and we don't do fucking. We didn't do like year 6, year 7, year 8. It's M1, M2, M3, D1, D2 as the years.
Oh my God.
So I started to forget what years people were in, which I had to explain. Like, someone would ask me what year you are. I was like, I'm M5, and be like, well, of course you're not gonna fucking understand what M5 is.
What is that equivalent?
That's the equivalent of year 11. Yeah.
Oh, GCSE.
Yes. So that you do your final MYP grades, and they are piss easy. They are so easy, so much easier than the GCSEs. Because I had Holden, who was doing GCSEs at the same time, and he found it like he had to put in work, and all of us in NYP didn't have to put in work. So I think diploma's harder because the step up is bigger, whereas I think it's less of a leap.
Shall I tell you what it is though? Again, with the exam boards and stuff, different exam boards depending on what you're doing. So if you go from, I don't know, AQA English and then you start doing, I don't know, some harder exam board, Cambridge, whatever, for A-level, the step up's going to be harder than if you've done, I don't know, IGCSE, biology, and then you go to an easier one. Yeah. So it varies for each subject, but...
Yeah, that is quite, confusing. I don't know, but I definitely don't think that it would have suited me to do the normal thing. But it was weird going to an international school, doing the international system as an English guy. Like, there weren't many English people, and it was always like, why are you here? Like, it was always like, why are you like an English guy? And people would ask me, where are you from? And saying I was from England is a really weird thing in an international school. So they're like, this school isn't for you though, so why are you here? But it was, I don't know, there were others too. It's just, in my opinion, it's whatever suits you. People like to say like, oh, this is better, but I think they're all so different that it's really down to what you think you'd prefer, right? So, yeah.
I think as well, it's sick for networking, obviously, because then you'll have people all over the world you'll know.
That's true, and I do. But then again, it's got its disadvantages because socially, I had to say goodbye, and like people were coming in and out. Teachers too, so teachers wouldn't stay at the school for a long time either.
That's right.
So people would like swap over, especially friends as well. But then again, Hendon Prep, like the school we went to together, like very, very international as a school, right? So I was always used to it.
Same with City. There's a lot of, I think it's just London though. There's so much shopping and changing.
You think so? Because I was thinking about this because I was having a chat with my dad earlier about diversity and about how I felt diversity in my school has helped me so much throughout the years in like shaping my world like perspective, right? But there's still so much of that missing in so many schools and areas in London and people in London. Like, you'd think just because you're from London, like the way I've been brought up in London has been so multicultural, but I really don't see that in other people because I don't think that how could that be possible with people having the views they do. But then again, it is better than other places because I know that like in Yorkshire and stuff, like there's no diversity whatsoever.
You've got to realise that London, when people say, oh, I live in London, like, they could be talking about a lot of different things as we go through uni. The number of people that claim they're from London, that live in Essex, that live in
Essex doesn't
Guildford,
count.
that live
I
in
don't count
Sevenoaks, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So obviously the experience in all those places is going to be completely different.
Yeah, exactly, that's true actually.
And then I think as well, like, even in London, yes, it's multicultural in the sense you will find a lot of cultures, but there are still communities within that.
Yeah.
There will be schools, you know, a mile away,
Yeah.
where you'll have, you know, the majority of one population.
Yeah. It's
So
true.
everyone's experience is different. I think, again, we were lucky that the places we went to did have so many different types of people.
But that's like, I mean, I went to state school for, like, before I came to Hendon, and the thing is that the big problem with the state school I went to, which is in Muswell Hill, is that even though it's a state school, it's in Muswell Hill, and you have to be in catchment, which means your family has to live in Muswell Hill, which means even though you're paying nothing to be at the school, just like with Fortismere APS, I went to I don't know, you know APS, right?
I don't know about that.
You know Fortismere, right? So they're both Muswell Hill schools, and I went to the primary school of
There's Highgate Wood
APS.
as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know if Highgate Wood's state though. I don't know.
it is.
Oh, maybe. But I just know that if you're living in the catchment, then you know it's not going to be the same experience as other places like in inner city school in London. And so the diversity is going to be different just because of socioeconomic backgrounds and stuff like that. But it was an interesting discussion I was having with my dad actually, because in America we were talking about how America feels to me like a group of separate countries. I don't like each state is so different in the way that you know even their laws, right? It's almost comparable with like states within the EU. You have like EU law and then you have state law, and in America you obviously have federal law and you have state law. And I was thinking about like the difference between growing up in let's say Texas versus growing up in New York,
Yeah.
and what the diversity is going to be like, and how there's so much difference in. This is why it feels like there's so much polarization in America, right? It's because every place is so like different from each other. It feels as if there's no chance that Texas will ever have the same viewpoints as.
The thing is that you'd be
Florida.
surprised that although like the way, again, I'm not an expert, I haven't actually been to the US, but the way it's described in movies versus, no, I actually haven't.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was meant to, like, but didn't happen.
What, this year?
No.
Oh, okay.
I've got family living there, so
Oh,
I was
okay.
meant to go. Yeah, but,
Alright.
the way it's described in movies, you know, Texas Cowboys and living there,
Yeah,
where like
yeah.
there's actually high populations of like black people and like Latinos and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I see what you mean, and
Yeah,
I know like the middle. I don't know what it's called. Yeah.
Like just middle America.
The middle
yeah,
America.
Yeah.
That is very very different to the coast, but
Yeah.
I think there is potentially more diversity in terms of populations, but I don't think it's necessarily. They're not mixed properly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
They have
It seems
different.
quite segregated.
They have. I think there's like big cultural differences, like bigger than if you were to look at towns. Like you look at towns and cities in the UK.
Yeah.
Like comparing Liverpool with London, the differences are so minuscule when comparing like state with state in America,
True.
and just so culturally different. One thing I never really paid any attention to it until recently was NASCAR. Right, you know NASCAR racing.
Yeah.
Going around in circles, like
Yeah.
probably I can't imagine a worse sport personally. But NASCAR's enjoyed primarily in like southern states, right? Which is why they've got such a big problem with the Confederate flag. I don't know if you've read about this recently.
No, I haven't.
Well, basically there was this there is like one black driver in like the whole of higher tier NASCAR. There's one black guy, and
Say the same with
recently.
F1 though.
Sorry,
You could say the same with F1.
that's true actually.
And it's like male cycling.
Yeah, there are a few sports that are clearly just like so lacking with diversity. But it's odd because I kind of see NASCAR as this like really hillbilly kind of sport, and it makes sense that the people who get into it would be the people who are fans of it.
Sure.
But there was a big controversy with recently. There was an event for a start. Right, America are having events like NASCAR racing where packs 70,000 people. It's like, are you fucking? I don't understand what they're doing with like how they're ever gonna get out of this like coronavirus thing. I think it's just gonna keep getting worse and worse for them.
Yeah.
But anyway, this black driver, he found a noose in his dressing room after NASCAR said that they don't want any more Confederate flags at their shows. Everyone showed up with a Confederate flag. NASCAR confirmed that there was a noose in his locker, right? So someone had planted a noose in his locker, and it was really odd to see how an organisation, a sports organisation, can sort out this kind of like this racism that seems so hard to detach from the fans of that sport. I think you see it like we see it a lot now with what footballers are talking about in the Prem with like the racism that goes on, and when there's enough advocacy for it, as in football in the UK, right? The sport is so diverse that the players, even though the fans, there's clearly not as much diversity among the fans as there are amongst the players, but you have like key players speaking up against it. But in this instance, with NASCAR, there is just one driver from that background, and it's good to see all these other people, like all the other drivers were completely in support of the criticism of the Confederate flag. But how are they ever going to get the fans involved? How are they ever going to get the fans involved? That's the question.
It's going to have to be a long-term like kind of culture change thing.
Yeah.
I think with all these things, like we were saying before, that they're not going to be instantaneous.
Yeah.
And they have to happen at, I think, a rate at which people feel comfortable. Otherwise, you have a huge backlash. But it may be the case that there's people that didn't support the Confederate flag kind of idea. Then when they heard it was being taken away instantly, decided to do it as like a protest thing.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
It is crazy.
It's quite a balance to find to ease people out of their kind of patterns.
I think I'm not saying don't change anything.
Yeah.
That's not where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
But I do think that in general, people's views stem from their upbringing, what their parents have told them, their experiences, so many different things. They can't necessarily be blamed until they're exposed to the education that could suggest they're wrong.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And even then, it's going to take a while.
But then, like, how do you, to a country like America with so many people, right, such a massive population, with such, you know, inadequate resource distribution, how do you ever educate to the degree and quality that's required?
It's, again, there's so many different things that go on there. I think it's a huge task, like whether it's talking America, UK.
I mean, I don't know where you'd even like start with that. I do think it's an education. I think that's like a pretty understandable, like I think that's pretty understood consensus is that the resolutions for almost, in my opinion, almost every social injustice stems from a massive lack of contextualized learning. I don't think that there's much that teaches us in school about how to behave, because I think we leave it up to parents, right?
The thing is that we do have, like, I guess, psychological viewpoint, positive and negative reinforcement. If you were like just stripped naked in a reception class, you'd get in trouble. You know?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. If you were kind to your friends, you'd get a gold sticker or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we do get told a bit.
I do think that doesn't deter people though, because let's say I think you're looking at it from a perspective of like, okay, fine, behaviour is monitored in schools. I think that's fair to say, but I've never been taught, you know, about I've never been taught in a lesson, like in a constructed manner, how to treat other people, how to be polite. And yes, it's reinforced, as you say. If I'm nice to my friend, maybe I'll get a gold star, right? But it teaches. I've never learned anything about. I've only learned things like racism through the eyes of, for example, literature when I'm in English class or something. Which means if I didn't want to pay attention to the message, I really didn't have to.
I think it's, like, personally, I disagree though. Like, I remember we had citizenship lessons, PSHE talked about it a lot. I remember in my school experience, I have had teachers say, like my secondary school especially, said that our aim is, yes, to get you good grades, but also to bring you up to be gentlemen.
Yeah.
So they'd always make sure that we dressed appropriately, kind of like, they'd correct you on the smaller things. And yes, obviously, most of it's down to your parents that you spend, you know, most of your lives with them up until the age of 18. But I do think the school that does play like a big part in it.
Do you think they play a big enough? Do you think that it could be enforced that schools and therefore teachers, because they're essentially going to be the ones with the power in that situation, should be able to enforce things that are thought of as parent enforced? Or do you think it's too much of an infringement on a parent's upbringing of their own kids?
I think the classic answer is it depends. It depends on what you're talking about.
Sex ed. I mean, sex ed's something that in America there are a lot of complaints about sex ed, like the teachings of sex education, and also, more importantly, I do think that there's a problem in schools with a lack of PSHE teaching for like non-heterosexuals, right? So I know that that's nowhere near as bad as it is in America, because there's almost teachings against it in some like cultures there. So
also, yeah, just to add on that one, I find that a lot of the teaching in sex ed that I've had to do with non-heterosexual kind of interactions is done in, I'd say, quite a cringy way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I remember we had to watch this every week. We had to watch part of this TV show, and in the TV show, it happened to be that everyone turned out to be gay, but just the way it was done was so cringy.
I hate it. I hate it so
made
much.
Everyone just feel really awkward.
Yeah. And I think that they don't teach you anything important.
It's just
like there's no I mean, when I think teachers tend to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of situations when talking about straight sex, but I've never heard a teacher talk in detail at all about, you know, gay sex, or, you know, even about because they teach it for the sake of like teaching people how to reproduce. There isn't much, which means that in all the situations where reproduction isn't possible, right, lesbian and gay sex, there's not going to be much to teach, which is really like an issue. I was never taught about how AIDS is such a big deal in the gay community, which I think is an important piece of teaching that was missed out in PSHE lessons. Because all the STDs, they're all expressed, but even HIV/AIDS was explained, but there was no. It felt as if people had to ask their own questions when it came to what's for them, and for a lot of young gay people, that's probably not the most comfortable thing to do in a lesson.
I think, as you're saying as well, I think with all areas of behaviour that's being taught it in theory, and like, you have to go out and practice it. I have to go and practice about. I can read as many books as I want about not being racist and being nice to people. I have to practice it. I have to practice generosity. You know, and I think it's so different. And I think as well with sex education as well, I thought there was this strange kind of dynamic going on where a lot of schools teach it so that they don't make headlines with students being pregnant or having mishaps that get publicised.
You think?
A lot of the time,
Oh wow.
If hypothetically your school had a couple of teenage pregnancies and word got around the schools and to protect their parents,
so it was like,
I think it always damages the reputation of it.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's one way I thought it. So I always thought that sometimes the talks we had and so on, they were trying to scare you into thinking risks were higher than they were, or making you take action, not because you wanted to, but because you felt scared about it.
I mean, that's 100% the attitude with drugs. 100% the attitude with drugs, because I think I have like quite a fairly rounded experience of drug use, right? And it's, no one's making, what do you say?
Is that you, big man?
Yeah. No one's making the case of good for you, right?
Yeah.
But you're really not told the truth about how to, because the problem is, if schools and the kind of education system doesn't inform you safe ways of using drugs and only tells you that they're awful, it means that you have absolutely you can do it where you teach someone how to safely, you know, use drugs and the rights and wrongs of what to do and making sure that people do things safely and not encouraging it. I think it's not hard to find.
I think the other problem with drugs as well is if you're told drugs are bad, very bad, the moment you do it, you think, right, well, I've done it, so I might as well just, you know, that's the only option, to do drugs or not to do it. There's no safety. Yeah,
and also if you're told that they're awful and you're going to die if you take them, and then you take them and you're fine and you love them, you're going to be like, like I am, you're going to be like, all of it was a lie. Right, when in reality, drugs are like bad for you. You definitely should take them.
Drugs are bad, kids.
Yeah, drugs are bad. But essentially, it's that finding that balance of teaching kids how to live their lives safely and respectfully without really like shoving it down their throat,
There's also, I read about the idea that drugs being branded as bad sometimes has the opposite effect. That obviously kids, the ages you're being taught about drugs, want to rebel. If you label something as bad, it's the rebellious thing to do, it's seen as cool. If you label it as a non-issue, no one would really care.
Would you say you've noticed that in like
some people?
Yeah,
I know especially in our generation anyway. There's this huge culture of like popping pills, kind of skateboard vans, weed, you know what I mean? Listen to Lil Khan or whatever.
Yeah,
do what you want, but you know what I mean. I just think that sometimes it comes with a part of the culture that people want to be identified with, along with clothing and music taste and so on. Yeah. And not necessarily out of the individual choices laid on a night out, as they'd say in schools. Yeah.
This is why I'm in support of the decriminalisation. This is one of the reasons I'm in support of the decriminalisation of drugs, and why I think this whole, you know, war on drugs kind of mentality is just so awful for the cause, right? Because you want essentially for people to be doing. I I know you want to, in your head, think of it as, we want as few people to do drugs as possible. But in reality, you want people to be as safe as possible.
And not addicted, and not the crime that comes with it.
Exactly, and you can extract those things from it.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't become such a rebellious act, and I think it would essentially... there's a huge issue with UK teens, which I don't think is experienced anywhere else in the world.
To the same degree, yeah.
Which is like, even just the rise of drugs like Kep.
Yeah.
And how, like, it's odd because in nowhere else is it such a big deal. America, it's not a big deal. The rest of Europe, it's not a big deal. And ketamine is so popular here, and it's like, what are the reasons for this, right? And I think it's because there's so little. I was never taught about how to, ensure that I was taking things safely, or I was doing things in the correct manner, or if I wasn't even told properly of the risks of particular drugs. It was just always this big don't do drugs kind of thing. And if I was taught a little bit more about the specifics, I think my mentality would be different about it.
True. I think, again, from someone who, I guess I don't really do it, I could see why schools present it in such a way.
Yeah.
And again, if there's a drug death in a school, again, on reputation, looks bad, they don't want you to do it. And I think that's part of it, that schools teach you things so that you don't do it while you're there.
Yeah.
Not necessarily so that you don't do it, or do it safely later. I remember one PSHE lesson, they were saying to us, like, one of the guys said, I don't care what you do outside of school, when you're left the school and so on, just don't do it in school uniform or while you're here. And I think that kind of attitude is what creates the problem when teaching it.
But you know what? I hear that a lot with other things too, unrelated to drugs as well. Yeah. Don't do it in your school uniform. It's like, if you're wearing your school uniform, be extra polite, as if that's the reason you should be polite, is because you're representing your school. No, the reason that you should behave well is because it's going to be important for you.
The thing is, I do agree with the school though, in that anything that you do, as soon as you're wearing a school uniform, you are becoming a rep.
Yeah, I agree.
And if I'm rude to a lady on the train or
they will know.
They will know it's the school, and they'll say to their friends or whatever, you'll never guess what so and so did from this school. And, you know what I mean?
And then it gets
I think at the end of the day, especially for independent schools, it's a business, and you need to protect your image.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that therefore private schools have? Because I think that private schools have always struggled with finding the balance between ulterior motive, i.e., money, which is essentially they are above all else they are businesses, right? Yeah. And the quality of outcome for their students, because I do think that business is generally prioritized over children's education until children's education helps the business, right? Because grades do equal a strong reputation, which means that they'll get more inquiry into their school. But past that, I do think that schools really, like, I remember doing 11 plus or whatever it was, and like getting into either Highgate or Mill Hill, and you then had to like pay a lot of money just to hold your place.
Deposits. I thought that was a strange one.
My mum was pissed. Yeah. Because my sister went to Belmont and then went to Mill Hill for a bit, and just the way that they operate is very business-like, and it doesn't seem to take into account the real needs of students, because a lot of the kids who go to these schools are middle to upper class kids, and they're able to rinse them for money, because that education at that level is extremely expensive, and the money that goes into it. I mean, I don't think at Hendon or at Dwight I saw that money come back in any way to my learning.
I see what you mean. I think you got to look at it in a few ways. So, like, one, you're immediately paying. You said you've been to smaller schools for the class size.
Yeah.
So immediately, just in terms of your confidence, your classroom experience, you have more attention.
Yeah.
The classes are smaller. You're paying for that intimacy kind of with students and teachers. I think if you didn't pay the money, your class size would be a lot larger.
That's true.
If you had needs, they wouldn't be attended to. I think as well. So for my school, secondary school is a bit bigger. I'm paying for the facilities as well.
Yeah.
So we have an on-site swimming pool, we have this, we have that, and a straight turf pitch. Would I have that otherwise? Probably not.
That's true.
And I know that again with like that school is right in the centre of London. To actually get the land, they were saying it's one of the most expensive football pitches.
I feel that's a lot better value for money than, than Dwight.
Yeah.
But I think like there's other issues with the school I went to.
It also depends what you view the purpose of your school to be. So my parents always said to me, they said that well, I'll get a bit later on, not from the start, but part of the reason they wanted to send me to a private school was because they valued the networking that I would get from it afterwards. By the time we're 30, if you need a lawyer, you'll be able to call one up. As a mate. Yeah. If you need the bank or whatever, you'll be able to call one up.
I didn't ever think about it in that way, but
my dad was saying it's always an investment that he says you'll reap the benefits of it. So I think in terms of that, yes, in terms of the schooling, you may have had loads of shit teachers and loads of dickheads at school, whatever. You think, I haven't got it. Give it another 10 years and you may think slightly differently about it.
It slowly pays off.
And it's your ambition as well. Would you think that you could do this, or any of the things you've done, or Camp America, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your outlook is so broadened.
It's true. I do think that it's a lot easier to see the negatives than the positives. Don't get me wrong, I do understand that. But then again, like I still feel extremely grateful to have been given the opportunity to go to private school, but I really fundamentally don't like the idea of privatized education.
I agree.
I mean, the idea that someone with more money than someone else has a this access to opportunity, which I think is probably one of the most compelling pieces of evidence of how our opportunity is unequal, right? Is how having a lot of money means that you can send your kids to a good school, so they make a lot of money, so then they can send their kids to a good school.
The counter to it though is that, so if we're talking networking, if you're that family, you can pay to go to things,
right?
Like, I don't know, speaking clubs until 16, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That will get you the network. If you're looking for education, you can pay for a tutor that will get you that. If you want the facilities, you can pay for your kid to go to a football club or something like that. But I agree, in the general sense, school isn't just about the lessons or any of the things we mentioned, that you're there all the time talking to people, the experience you have with everyone matters a lot. So I agree, I don't think that they should exist on a moral basis, but I think that discrepancy, the advantage you'll get from having money will always remain.
Yeah.
Because you can pay for things. So, you know, even if we're talking about, I don't know, you do Latin or something, or I don't know, you do something anyway, and you can always pay for the experience to go there. You know what I mean? You do Spanish, you can pay to go and live in Spain for a year. You always, not always, but generally speaking, the ambition we're talking about, the experience, you know, the way you're taught to learn and care about it is always going to be better if you can pay for it than if you can't.
Yeah, I kind of see that. I don't think that it's the be all and end all of inequality. I don't think that it would solve very many things, but I think that my major concern with it is that I can see the opportunities that something like going to a good school and how so put it this way, not just opportunities in that respect. I do think that it would be interesting to and advantageous to have as much diversity as possible, right? And with public and private education, unfortunately, there is a missed diversity quota, and that's children from different socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Which I think could be more important than other forms of diversity on so many levels. And I think that what it ends up, I would be very thankful if there were bursary and scholarship quotas that were increased for schools, because I do think that that a mix of backgrounds is vital to education.
I was lucky at City. I think they said over 50 or 60% of people were on scholarships of some sort.
You see that,
30% being full, and you were never ever told who was on what.
Yeah, of course.
So you could never ever know about it.
Yeah.
And I just thought
that's the
way it should be kind of done.
Yeah. Although again, I was thinking about this and going deeper into, because I was having a discussion with someone about the ideas of, and I mean I did speak to you briefly about it before, the idea of quality of opportunity and how we view, let's say someone's on a scholarship, right? They're given better opportunities, right? And this is a kid, remember, right? So let's say a child on a scholarship from the age of 14, right? Let's say it's an academic scholarship, or even a sports scholarship, right? But I think what are the reasons for that person being able to accomplish that opportunity to attend privatized education? We've both discussed, and I think we can both agree that privatized education sets you up for a more successful life.
I think it should be taken down.
Sorry?
I think it should be taken down. I don't think privatized education is good.
No, okay, sure, but I know what you're saying with like scholarships and stuff. I still think that there's this problem with like why is this guy better at football?
Yeah.
Right? There's two things that you can say as a result. Either it's he's born with it, which means that someone who doesn't get the scholarship is unfairly treated for the way they were born, or it's something they've worked on. What you've got, in my opinion, you've got to question what motivations were behind this person's, let's say, commitment to a sport. Let's say it was that they are extremely talented at football because they were always committed, showing up to training, their parents really pushed them. All of these things, in my opinion, still are external factors.
Yeah.
So it's still not a child's, accomplishment. In that respect, I don't think that it's fair that we have this. I know you agree with me with privatized education and how I think it's a staple of inequality of opportunity.
But just to be clear, you're saying that basically, if you took any child and put them in the same position as someone who got a scholarship, they could probably get it too.
It's going to get a bit like metaphysical, but essentially, my beliefs are that people are born with predisposed kind of access to, let's say, traits that they have, which react with the environment that they're brought up in to equal the person that they are, right? Which means that someone in that exact same position, there's nothing inherently special. And if there is something inherently special, it means they're born with it, which means that there's still, that's still unfair because you cannot treat people differently for something they did not control.
No, I see what you mean. I agree.
Yeah, so but it really, when you get into how that affects the world around us, I think it gets extremely disagreeable. I think that you wouldn't agree with the extent of which I believe in that kind of system.
Give me an example.
Okay, what it would mean in a more rounded sense is that everyone who's accomplished amazing things had no personal, there's no, the idea of, he persevered through this. Let's take an important figure like Mahatma Gandhi, right? Mahatma Gandhi persevered and is this amazing person for the things that they've done. But under this philosophical doctrine, the amazing things they've done were handed to them by the traits that they either received from birth or had no control in.
This is where I disagree with you. I think that people can be born a certain way, so traits, I'm talking like you got, blue eyes and
height,
you're short, or whatever. And I think that there's the things that you do based on your background. So again, you may be racist because your parents were so on. You may be hardworking because your parents were, or believe in it. but the actual doing of the work, I still think has some merit in itself.
I think
Do you see what I'm saying?
I think we like to think that, but there's no in my kind of in the ideology that I believe in, right, and I kind of follow, I don't see any evidence of where this kind of idea of you know, essentially the extent of free will that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we can observe that.
How would I say? I agree with where you're kind of going with this. That so in the example of a person with a scholarship,
Sure.
they may have parents who believe in hard work.
Yeah.
So if you put another person in their shoes, they would have the same parents who believe in hard work and would probably work hard.
Yeah.
And I see there's a slight contradiction in what I'm about to say, but I do believe them doing the work that their parents believe in is what we're rewarding. And
But what's the difference? What are the differences between someone's mentality to persist in what their parents believe in and just having parents who believe in it? Bear in mind, there's also the idea that your parents could, you know, not be hardworking, and you can understand that as a kid, and you could want to do the opposite.
and that's where I commend them even more.
Sure, but that's still, I mean, you're saying it as if it's the decision that they've made. But can you see, like, this is my deterministic kind of idea. Do you think that it's possible, in any way, shape, or form, for that to have come from something that isn't environmental? And if it is environmental, which I'm saying it must be, then how can you ever award someone for what is not in their control?
My personal conviction, like having studied this and so on, so I do philosophy and politics.
We both do philosophy. So.
I believe in what you're saying,
Yeah.
but personally I do believe that deterministically everything you do, you know, you're kind of going to do anyway, you know, advertising or it's programmed and so on.
Yeah.
I decided to have this conversation not because I wanted to, but because I was programmed to and my subconscious told me to. Fine. But I believe for society we need to pretend it is otherwise.
But
Do you see what I mean?
I was thinking about this the other day because
Otherwise I think you get to weird places.
I partly agree with that. I think that there are certain examples where you have to believe in it, and I think there are certain examples where you have to disregard it. I do agree, when it comes to achievement, it is odd. It would create a very odd kind of upbringing for a younger generation to have that doctrine as what is believed and what is followed. However, for the flip side of it, instead of looking at the accomplishment, we look at how punishment is handed out and how we shouldn't be faulting people, because then you've got this issue where you're contradicting yourself, because if you praise everyone for their accomplishments but then you also say someone doing something is because, like, someone doing something wrong is because they're environmentally nurtured to do so,
Right.
how that contradiction then exists, and how do you combat that?
My counter argument to this is that us two acknowledging that our environment kind of determines us in some way
Yeah.
is a kind of determination, because now you realise that you can choose to be surrounded by things that will shape you in a certain way. For example, you acknowledge the way you are, I guess, or how you're determined.
Yeah.
You can now, this sounds stupid, but you can kind of choose, or that adds to your ability to choose to you know, predispose yourself or surround yourself by things that aren't racist, for example.
Interesting. You see it as a kind of paradox. The more you ignore, the more you're able to understand the deterministic nature of our environment and how that affects us, the more free will we obtain.
That's kind of how I see it. So if you look at someone with the prison system example, technically we're punishing people for living in poorer societies where morals aren't explained very well and you're surrounded by all sorts of things, and then just putting them in the prison system. For someone like that who finds out that this is the way things are, so people talk about institutional racism a lot recently, I feel that once you acknowledge that institutional racism exists, it is then on you to kind of educate yourself about what it is and make sure that you're not a victim of it.
Yeah.
Did you see what I mean?
But then there are situations where, however hard or however knowledgeable you are of that influence by the environment, your actions may always be determined by that environment. And I think institutionalized racism is one of those examples. You say that it's maybe more, you're able to understand, when you're able to understand institutionalized racism to a higher extent, you are then more aware, and therefore you're able to ensure that you're not as involved with it, right? But by its nature, there are some instances in which that is, unavoidable, right? So,
and my thing is, I'm trying to say, it's not the extent to which you're involved in it, it's the extent to which you can change it.
Sure. Okay. So
if I take institutionalized racism and look at racial stereotypes of black people are criminals in a gang and so on, I now know that if I decide to not do those things, I realise that for the perception of everyone who then sees me, it will help towards stopping that view.
Yeah, I feel that there is, I'm not able to relate to that, but I do think from the perspective of homosexuality, right? I think that I feel as if there are ways in which I have opportunities to break what stereotypes exist around homosexuals, and as a result of that, I'm able to change those stereotypes by means of example. And the issue that I would have with that argument is that I feel as if I require a certain level of education. And how have I obtained that? Right? You're talking about how having a better understanding of something allows you a little more free will in how it's perceived in you personally. And so I think that the first thing that requires is this education of, for example, in your case, institutionalized racism. Now, how is that obtained? Because for the majority of people, it's not. It's completely, for so many people, it's completely unavailable to them by no fault of their own.
True.
Completely unavailable to them. And is there a way that can be changed? Because, if you're going to let people be the decider of their own kind of understanding, then I think you're asking too much of people who have no access to that information, because there are so many people who will look at institutionalized racism and just ignore it based on what they know, based on their environment that they were brought up in. So I do think that there are examples where it works and examples where it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think in general, free will is one of those places where I think it's full of contradictions. Because I think many people, when you lay out the arguments, will agree, we're determined.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't like that, let's pretend we're free. And my personal opinion is, for society to function, you have to pretend you're free, even if you're not. I think it's known as like the noble lie.
But is it pretend? Essentially, the pretending that you are partaking in is just as determined as everything else.
True, but how do I say it? It's like if I punch someone in the street.
Sure.
If you looked at it from a purely deterministic viewpoint, you'd say all these events in his life have led up to this moment.
Yeah.
Therefore, we can't punish him.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, first of all, punishment, or the idea of punishment, serves as a deterrent, i.e., determines my actions beforehand.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the ideas of
it being
a purely like if the world believed in determinism, it would then
to the extreme.
Then it would completely rewrite itself, because then people would believe that actions don't have consequences, which would then cause mayhem. But it would only cause that mayhem if free will existed, because if but that obviously makes sense. You're saying you have to pretend as if it exists. But if it doesn't exist, and what we're really living through is an entirely determined reality, then there is no avoiding or changing anything about it. I know you're saying like pretending that you have free will. I think that's more just the world's way of ensuring that we don't go insane. I think it's more that it's a nicer thing to believe, and I think that it's a more believable thing.
I agree with that part.
Yeah, so I think that believing it helps us just process things better, and if it weren't true, and if we did have even the smallest amount of free will, then I do think that it shapes a better environment, which means, as far as I'm concerned, I think you're right. I think that whether or not it's true or it's false, we should definitely persist with the mentality that free will is accessible, so that we don't fall into the trap of contradiction and paradox.
It's just a really, I'm just trying to get my head around.
I mean, when I learned about it, it fucked me up.
Okay.
because I've never thought about it in that detail. And there's other things that, I mean, like, I don't know about how interested or how invested you are in your studies or with philosophy, but reading particular parts of philosophy, just very small but valid arguments set out by famous philosophers over the years and educational thinkers over the years, has completely thrown me off course. Right, I didn't used to believe in God at all, right? And I read a very small amount of Descartes, and that my perception of God completely changed.
What did you? Sorry, I'm interested in this one because I thought his accounting for God was rubbish.
Did you? I thought it was quite clever. I thought it caught me out at every turn. And then what I ended up doing was doing a piece on it, and I was writing to my mum about it. I was writing about it, and then while writing about it, I went, "Wait a second," and I looked at what I'd written, and what I'd actually done is completely supported. So I was trying to deny it. And what I read it over again, and I completely supported his view on how, I mean, the idea of the fact that infinity exists within our consciousness, the fact that we're allowed to be aware of the theory of infinity means that somewhere it must exist, because everything that we culminate inside of our minds must exist somewhere, that otherwise how could it have been there? I mean, I don't actually believe him in that it was. He says it was planted there. I don't believe with that as such, but if you think of anything that you want to think of, it's a culmination of thoughts you've had or things that you can perceive. Now, a lot of people call it lazy, and I think you're probably the same. I think you probably call it lazy, but his idea of the fact that we can perceive and understand infinite means, because we understand we're finite. We know what omnipotent means and omniscient.
I think first of all, I think that's such a bold claim that he makes. First of all, because all powerful, when you think of it, you think of someone who can do everything that you can think of.
Yeah.
Omnipotent doesn't mean that.
No, it means literally everything. Yes.
Including things you can't think of. So first of all, I think that those concepts aren't.
But I love how he shuts it down. He then goes. I mean, the way he writes is quite prejudiced. He then goes, or pretentious. Sorry. He then goes, if you don't understand it, it's because you're not it.
Yeah.
So because you're finite, that's your lack of understanding, and therefore you should. The fact that you're acknowledging that you don't understand something means you're acknowledging you're finite, which means you must acknowledge infinite, which means that infinite exists.
This is how I put it, right? First of all, I think that they're concepts, not real things.
Okay.
So if I take a table, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a table exists in reality. Yes, I can conceptualize a table because I've seen lots of different tables, but it's an object. The idea of infinity, I'd say, is a concept and not a number.
Sure.
It is in itself, by definition, not finite. It's not. We can't touch it. We can't do anything. Yeah. I personally feel, is it Locke's simple and complex ideas or Hume's perceptual ideas that we. So I don't know. I look at a Stella bottle, right? and then
Do
I
that quite a
can
lot.
I can imagine I can imagine 2. You know.
Yeah.
I can get the number 1. I can keep adding
Yeah.
1 to it. I can kind of get it from there. I think that a lot of the things in our mind, such as the idea of, you know, the pink elephant.
Yeah.
That you get the idea of pink and elephant.
Yes.
You put them together.
Yes.
I think infinity's kind of like that. You just think of the number of 1, and you just keep adding 1,
Yeah.
and then you reach a concept where, you know, it's
So
almost.
you think that you believe that it's like kind of unconceptual. By definition, infinity isn't obtainable in the mind.
I personally think, you can explain infinity by a guy seeing 1 of something, anything,
Yeah.
1 rock, and just thought, wow, imagine if I kept adding 1.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
imagine if this river went on forever.
Yeah.
I don't think that means that there's God or infinity exists somewhere or anything like that.
It's just a means of understanding it better.
And again, conceptually, the universe saying it's infinite, you know, they say it's going to contract to whatever, right? It may be expanding constantly.
But it's impossible.
As we know
Yes.
it, right? But anytime you measure it, it'll be a specific distance.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd say conceptually, if it follows that pattern,
Yeah.
it will tend towards infinity, how mathematicians say it.
Yeah.
It will fit with the infinity concept.
Yeah.
But infinity is not going to exist because you can't reach it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think Descartes is just wrong.
But Descartes' belief is that the impossibility in your the impossibility of conceptualizing infinity is an example of where we are finite. So our lack of understanding of infinity, as you say, it's not something that we can conceptualize. The lack of understanding of it just proves that we are not infinite. We are not infinitely knowledgeable. We are not infinitely knowing. We are just unable to access certain things, which makes us finite beings.
And again, I think he's wrong there, that there's plenty of human processes that you look through psychology and biology, they still don't understand, you know, like people yawning, why does that work? We don't understand. That doesn't mean that I'm not a yawner.
Yeah.
It just means that we don't understand it. So I think he's wrong there. And then also, the idea that saying you don't understand something, therefore it must exist, I just think it's a bit of a cop-out, get-out clause.
But it made, I mean,
when I read it,
you
you seem very convinced.
I did seem, I was, well, when I say convinced, I don't now suddenly believe in God. It wasn't but it definitely opened my eyes to the possibilities of looking at things. And I think that's probably why the use of philosophy above all else, in my opinion, is that it helps you look at things in ways you've not looked at things before. Even if it doesn't change your mind about anything at all.
Agreed with that.
At least it allows you to access the possibility of other kind of other realities, other concepts. It definitely allows you more access to them, which I found far superior to other subjects that seem very, you know, way more specific. I definitely don't. I definitely think that philosophy is something that should be. I mean, in diploma it's taught. So we have theory of knowledge, which is essentially a mandatory philosophy course at A levels. But I think that that's important. I also think, going back to what we were talking about before, about how education can ever be manipulated in a manner to address problems of social injustice. I think philosophy is an excellent way of doing that.
So I think critical thinking especially teaches you how to think and break down arguments. I think, does this make sense or not? You'll see so many people on social media especially, they'll see a 20-second video out of context and it'll shape their whole viewpoint for the rest of their lives. I think I guess we're in the information age now. You need to filter things properly and think, does this make sense? Have I looked at the arguments for and against it? You know, that kind of thing, before adopting it.
And I think you look at the things that we agree on, right? Like how racism is wrong. These are very, very clear-cut, understandable arguments.
Quickly though, I also, just with philosophy when studying it, I call it a disassociation between how I live my life and what I believe philosophically. For example, I don't believe that right or wrong exists, but on a day-to-day I believe racism is wrong.
Okay, sure.
So, I just say that.
Sure. I mean, I definitely don't. It would be extremely inconvenient for me to have to explain my thought processes behind the actions I take, especially towards things like morality.
Yeah.
Like, if I lived my life the way I wanted to live my life, kind of the way I thought of my life philosophically, I mean, they are definitely, perpendicular to each other.
It's like
right?
Socrates guy tried. He's fucking nutter.
Right.
Living in a barrel.
Yeah. But even like I was in Tanzania and I was speaking with my boss about my use of plastic, right? And I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to use less plastic. I'd love to save the planet because of plastic. But in reality, day to day, I don't see myself doing it.
Yeah.
Is it immoral? You know what? Probably. But I do think that I do things that are not necessarily for the greater good, under the idea that it's okay to do some things not perfectly, right? And the example of meat eating, like eating meat came up. Do I think that eating meat is immoral? Yeah, probably. To the degree I eat meat, I eat a lot of meat. Is definitely immoral. Where I source my meat from, mostly places like McDonald's, is not good for the world. But I'm happy to be immoral and take that one. I'm happy to take that on the chin for the satisfaction. I think we're all lying to ourselves when we say that we're not satisfied with things that we wish weren't happening in the world.
Actually, I'll tell you, it's someone told me it's the idea that whatever you do in life, it's some kind of sacrifice where you're doing what you think is best at the time. Yeah. So whether it be getting angry or self-harm, in the moment, it is what you value the feeling over the morality of your personal safety, whatnot.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of that thing.
Yeah. As in almost like the idea that there's no such thing as a selfless act. Yeah. Like everything you do is for you, and whether you like it or not, I don't think that you can be necessarily. I mean, this is where I think we might differ. I don't think that there can be any blame to be put on to people who do things that they believe, which I always think they believe, is an okay thing to do, especially when I think that the mentality I have, the kind of a more forgiving, let's say, mentality of people who are immoral, actually helps provide them with the love and forgiveness which they need to present in their own lives. I think the way I'd probably word that is more like with the idea of racism, right? When I've seen like people who are who feed into this kind of racist rhetoric, I don't really see bad people. I see people who don't know better, and a lot of the time, I think that the world loves to hate them, and instead, if we were to provide them with overwhelming amounts of love, it would arm them with love they clearly don't have, and I think that is a more practical way of dealing with injustices, and a more thoughtful way of dealing with injustices.
Well, if you take so talking about people that do individual acts of racism or prejudice, yeah. So someone's, I don't know, just beat up someone because of the colour of their skin or their race or something. You would say what? What's your solution?
I would say that they are ignorant, and instead of being hated for the acts that they have done, they should be loved enough to be taught how to behave.
Okay.
Because I do think that as soon as someone is seen as racist, they're written off and they're not worked on, right? I do think it's our responsibility to work towards helping people who are helpless, right? And providing people with, whether it be like education or, just in my opinion, probably love, when it's clear to see they have a lot of hate in them.
I think it's It's the difference between our system and Scandinavia. that in prison and everything we focus on retribution, about taking revenge and hating, as opposed to rehabilitating people, whether they be murderers or whatever. That we're all people, and as you say, education's the key thing, and you can be made into someone that isn't a danger to society, given the right ideas.
See, I guess the biggest. You mentioned Scandinavia, and I think instead of having to convince anyone of it, Scandinavia is a perfect example of where a prison system fixated on rehabilitation has, what are we all working towards? We're working towards like less murder. I think that's like something that we can all acknowledge is something we want. More than we want to punish murderers, we want to ensure there are no murderers. I think that takes priority. So if I know that the Scandinavian system...
How it works, though. I think in reality, on an everyday, people are more willing, you'll see it, social media everywhere, to punish people for the crimes they've done, than look at the factors behind why they've done it, and stop it from happening in future.
But this is one of the many things that needs to be adjusted, right? Yeah. So I don't think you need to look any further in terms of crime and punishment and rehabilitation. I don't think you need to look any further than Scandinavia to see that a more a system that is kinder, a system that has clearly got more compassion, will always result in positive change towards crime, right? Because crime is the problem. Right, and I think we're too familiar with vilifying people who've done wrong, and I don't think it's fair. I don't think that it's right. I think that the mentality should change, and we should stop getting so angry at one another for things that, in my opinion, we don't even control. I think we should start to educate each other a little bit better, and. We've both talked about how important it is to discuss things, right? To have discussions, have debate, as opposed to just shutting people out. I don't think that's probably the main reason why I've proposed the idea of like a podcast, right? Because as much as it's fun to sit down with people who I, on almost everything, agree with, I do want to sit face to face with someone who I really disagree with.
I think that's where it's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think, as you said before, like it can only be done with people who are willing to learn and listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just like speaking to a brick wall.
I remember I was listening to a TED Talk with a feminist who was saying that she went to a men's rights activist group, and when she interviewed them, she realised, a few months afterwards, that she wasn't really listening to them. She was hearing what she wanted to hear and reacting to it emotionally. And I do think you need to sit back and approach it from the position, I might not be right.
Yeah, that's how you...
And, I can learn from this person. I just think, even again with all this racism stuff that's happening right now, a lot of the arguments people make, I think, are valid to some extent, or at least the facts they're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think they're often missing the things behind the facts or why that's happening, like we're talking about.
Yeah. And I do think that there's definitely room and space for those conversations to take place, as you say, only under the condition that stubbornness is removed. And I think I struggle with it. I think I probably struggle with it more than most. I am pretty convinced that I'm a stubborn person, and I find it hard to change my views on things.
I'm convinced I'm right, but I'm trying as hard as I can to
exactly.
But I think, again, the reason why it's difficult is because I feel like we've both thought about, given the subjects we do and everything, we've thought about our beliefs enough, probably more than most people, to accept different viewpoints and have come to the conclusions we've reached. It then becomes frustrating when someone who hasn't considered it at all and comes from a different viewpoint then tells you you're wrong with completely, I'd say, invalid arguments or different ideas.
And then you have to...
And you have to accommodate it.
Yeah, even though you know...
Even though deep down you're thinking, this is absolutely rubbish, but you have to take a deep breath and it's difficult.
And that's what, I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles. But then again, you have to understand, everything you listen to, everything you hear, every discussion you have is going to contribute to being a better person, right? So even conversations with people who you may fully understand, you will never follow their ideas. It's still beneficial to understand what their ideas are. because it allows you to better combat people of the same, let's say, ignorance in the future, right? So it's always beneficial to be a listener and to explore. I also find it like personally enjoyable. I don't know if you ever do this, but I spend a lot of time in Instagram comments.
Yes, I do as well. I love looking at the ones that I disagree with.
I love it, combating or trying to like get to the root of why some people say the things they say, and I really do like look through some Instagram comments and think, okay, let me try and break down how this person could have this viewpoint. And I engage quite a lot with discussion. I know a lot of people do it on Twitter, but I never really got into that.
I need to do it on the Snapchat private stories, because that's the people I have on there I know will actually reply. I'm not just screenshot, oh, this is outrageous. They'll actually want to hear the reasoning and interact with it. Otherwise I think it just becomes futile. And becomes this weird perception game you see on Instagram.
And I try to keep friends around who I think are like completely polar opposite to me, right, in terms of belief. My mum is, I've tried to tell her about how, with a debate like Brexit, it's very hard for someone who, like me or my mum, who believes fundamentally that Brexit wasn't the best choice this country's ever made, right? And how we're able to understand the motivations behind why 52% of those who voted wanted to leave the EU. What is the underlying reasons for that? Do I shut people out who I don't agree with on the Brexit debate, right? Am I really considering shutting out 50% of the population of the country I live in? Or do I instead want to try and get to the bottom of why they believe the things they believe, to ensure that I have a better understanding of the debate and a better understanding of how to combat that level of debate, right? It's the same reason why I'd say that I have friends, or have had friends in the past, who are homophobic, like fundamentally against homosexuals. They believe it's unnatural, they believe this, that, the other. They could have still been respectful, but they still like completely disagree with it. If for any other reason I continue to be friends with them for the purposes of attempting to change their opinions on it, right? I don't like the idea of leaving, like, I have friends from Eastern Europe, right, who have grown up in Eastern Europe. They really aren't with the whole gay thing, right? It's not something that they are familiar with at all, and in their environment it's very much looked down upon. Yet, how else is their mentality going to change if not led by example? And if they are constantly shown that they are going to be shut out and ignored by gay people, then it's just going to ignite the same mentality that has caused them to be that way. And I don't feel comfortable doing that.
I also think as well, if you're just shut out all the time, you're never ever going to have the people who I guess really matter there to change your views.
Yeah.
Because I think with loads of these issues, it's all well and good being PC and having a pride logo on whatever your company, you're saying, oh yeah, I'm not racist, Black Lives Matter, but until you have the people I think that are actually involved in the struggles talk to you or explain to you how they feel and their personal experiences, it's hard to break first of all the stereotypes that you'll have with the preconceived ideas, and then understand the actual struggles on a day-to-day of individuals.
I agree.
Because I think as well a lot of people, so I think homosexuality is a good one, because I think it's not to say recent, but compared to some of the other issues, the transition has been maybe faster or more significant from it being outlawed officially to now it being
it's definitely a more modern transition. Right.
I think it's more what I'm trying to say is when people I've known have been against it, it's only when but often it's when they have friends who come out as openly gay and whatever, they realise, oh wait, they're just normal people, or I need to protect my friend, I don't want this to be mean to my friend, let alone the ideas. And I think it's from there that they start to understand, wait, I can't have these feelings if I'm it puts them in a contradiction.
Yeah. So I do think that the familiarity that you can create with someone's environment, considering the fact that you maintain a diverse group of people who you surround yourself with, but again, we've spoken about this before, more importantly than any other diversity, a diversity of thought, right? You have people around you with massive diversity of thought. You are going to end up being a more rounded and educated person at the end of the day, and there is nothing more advantageous than that.
I think as long as you've considered your belief, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people, so the religious debates, I think, are a good one for me. Often when especially like some of my family is quite religious, aunts, uncles and whatever are trying to, I guess, preach to me, kind of convert me. It frustrates me sometimes because they aren't aware or haven't even considered what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so there's no way on earth that I'm going to be able to convince you that either you're wrong or that there may be an alternative viewpoint. So often I have to leave it because otherwise it becomes confrontational and they take it personally and so on. Yeah.
I do think that there's like, I think people get this a lot with grandparents, right? With the older generations, it's a lot harder. I think the more and more you live with your life, the more channeled you are to your views, right? The more tunnel visioned you become. And by the end of it, if you're 90 years old and you've believed something your entire life, it's going to be extremely difficult to provide to that person an alternative way of thinking. So sometimes I do believe that people get, I think, the comedian Ramesh Ranganathan, he has this idea of like, some people just get the old people pulse, right? Some people were brought up at a different time and are able to receive a bit of redemption on their beliefs just because, it was not such an acknowledged piece of, their culture when they were growing up to be forgiving towards different groups of people. So it makes a lot of sense to just go, this person's allowed. I don't have to combat it. I don't have to be confrontational. I don't have to fuel what they're saying by being conflictionary. But sometimes you just have to let it go. This is where I think at our age is the most important age to have and create that circle of diversity of thought and diversity of opinion, because I think now more than ever we are open to other people's viewpoints, and I think people our age are more open to our individual viewpoints too.
I think as well though that amongst friends especially, I like having or hearing their ideas, because in today's society I think there's a lot of things where you have to agree with the majority, and to hold an opinion otherwise, however considered, is wrong, And I think that it's good to discuss those things where it won't affect your job or whatever, just outright, whether someone's sex is, race or whatever, just, I want to hear it. Why do you think that? And because, again, as I said, sometimes the facts or the ideas are actually really, I think, coherent and like, oh, okay, I haven't thought of it like that before. But I think, it's one of those where I don't necessarily think that the majority is correct in all the cases, but you're not allowed to disagree with the majority on a practical basis, and I think it creates this kind of tension with some people. That I think if someone has racist thoughts or tendencies, if I go back to that, I would prefer for them to tell me in confidence. I'm not going to spread it around the telephone, so that we can address that, as opposed to them being, I guess, closeted or
we know that
being underground, and feeling resentful every time they have to act in this PC way just to make sure they don't lose their job. Or
because we know, we know that. We know that suppressing those kind of thoughts is a very unhealthy way of doing it, and it's only going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So if we create an environment where people aren't allowed to voice their opinions that are so dangerous, then those opinions just become more and more dangerous. Which is why I'm, definitely against the idea of this PC culture. And I think I speak about this a lot with comedy, right? With comedy, I like the idea of how comedy combats the things that are just unacceptable to say, because it is a format in which they can be said and they can be it's almost all satire. Like, you know, it's so ridiculously bad, and that's the reason it's funny in some situations. This is why, you know, recently, and I think, you know, this is fairly, you know, recent news, so maybe we should talk about it, is Little Britain and Come Fly With Me being taken off Netflix, which to me it's an understandable move from Netflix, but I'm going to be honest, I'm not a supporter.
I'm not a supporter either. Yeah.
I think that looking back at some of the things that Little Britain and Come Fly With Me has done, right? The skits, the sketches are would definitely be harder to make nowadays than when they were created. However, I never felt that they were promoting these rhetorics. I think instead that comedy does the opposite. I think it allows for people to understand that the reason that this is funny is because it's not okay.
Yeah,
right?
and it's wrong.
And you're able to understand that it's wrong, and that understanding that it's a wrong thing is not just what makes it funny, but what makes it useful, because then you understand what's wrong and what's right.
I thought that, a good example was on Come Fly With Me. They had that racist passport guy, and he stopped someone for being Eastern European, and it turned out he was the ambassador.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a perfect example of where you're not pretending, you're going along with the views that some people watching this may have, and demonstrating that they're probably not the case.
Yeah, and that's always been like present in Come Fly With Me, especially like that character is just as prevalent and evident in the series as other more, you know, racially provocative characters have been, and you've kind of got to find out like where really you draw the line. And laughing at something, I personally think makes it, in my mind, when I laugh at something, I'm laughing at it because it's ridiculous, it's something unacceptable, right? And it's helping me understand what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. So I think it's quite I think it's understandable why they were removed, but I think it's problematic.
It's for me, I think
it's not where the problem is.
Yeah,
it's just for me. It's just like, can we focus really on where the issue is? Because I can tell you, it's definitely not. The issue is definitely not Little Britain.
I think my problem is when you have things that stereotype or in the case of racism, homophobia, etc., present people in a way that is, I'd say, problematic, but presents it as if it's not a problem. You know?
Yeah.
So if, Four Lines is a great example, where obviously it's ridiculed to such an extent that you know it can't be serious.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. There's no way I can hold these views about these people. And in a weird way, although they're supposed to be, you know, terrorists or whatever, they're just normal guys going to the pub and stuff. And it almost serves against it.
Yeah.
I find the problem is, so I watched the horror movie of 8 Stars yesterday, and it was a serious horror movie, and there was this one black character. In the first scene, he robs a guy's house and takes his watch wearing a ski mask. Later on, he breaks into a safe containing codeine to take it home, and then pours LSD on his hand while it was bleeding by accident, gets high and takes a Glock out of nowhere. This is in a horror movie with ghosts and stuff. I start shooting all the time, and I just thought, there's no need for this. And for that to be done in a non-comical way, I think that's where it's a problem.
And there's no doubt that there exists in media, right? There exists, whether it's films, TV, even like art, stuff like that. There can obviously exist these stereotypes that are being propagated by TV shows or movies. But when the format is clearly comedic, especially stand-up, as someone's doing stand-up, you're on stage, your job is doing jokes, right? So you know that whatever someone says is in the format of a joke, and therefore it's not something that I think should be combated and shut down. Also, if you did think that, let's say, a comic who was racist, let's say, if you did think that they were racist, I think you're better off letting them say what they need to say so that you can combat that, you know, give yourself, if you're so right in that this person is prejudiced, then give yourself as much ammunition as possible to shut them down. Right, same with Donald Trump. I'd prefer Donald Trump say ridiculous things and be a horrible president so that I am able to, you know, combat that you know, that policy or that way of thinking. I would much, you know, it would be much worse if it was discreet.
Yeah.
You know, there's no doubt about that. It'd be much worse.
I think that's the same thing we're talking about with the discussions. It's better to be out there,
yeah,
so that we can talk about it, address it, and change it, as opposed to it be undercover, underground, and I also think with the comedy example, it's good because a lot of comedy that I'd say is against PC culture is self-deprecating. That they'll make fun of themselves, the stereotypes that people view of them, and therefore show it, you know, it's wrong. With Ramesh talking about his Indian heritage, oh, that's quite funny. Or, you know what I mean? I think in addressing it that way, you automatically again you go against it and combat it in a nice way.
Yeah, I agree. It's all this kind of satire and you know, it's almost the essence of comedy as a whole. And it's hard to see the world, but I also think that it's over exaggerated how much we're falling into this like PC culture. I don't think it's actually taking place as much as people think it is.
I think it is though. I was speaking to friends about this. I think that it creeps up in a way, especially with social media, where how you're perceived is more important than who you are.
Yeah.
So when we look at Black Lives Matter again and silent shaming, being seen not to post something, almost for some people means that you're a bad person.
Yeah.
When in reality, you could have donated $1 billion quid to doing all this stuff and organise everything, but because you haven't shown it actively on a kind of public stage, it means you're a bad person.
Yeah. And I encountered this problem.
And I just thought, I think this just shows it's part of the problem. That it's more important for me to say that I'm against kids dying in wherever
than it is to me, do anything about
first of all, to care about it, and then to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I mean by PC culture, that it's more important for you. You'll see companies do it, to fly a flag for a day, to post a little post or a caption, than to actually, you know,
give a shit.
To care about it or do anything about it. And for me, I think that's where PC culture creeps in. Because when you go to, you know, job interviews or whatever, oh, you've helped out at this charity, oh, you must be a really good person then.
Yeah.
Well, you really?
Yeah.
Oh, you posted this on Facebook, you must be a bad person.
Yeah. No,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. It doesn't. People, you're right about the perception, right?
And I think
how people are perceived seems to be more important than who people are. And social media is somehow has become this platform of who you are based on what you care about. Which, you know, essentially the only person I need to prove to is myself.
Yeah.
Right? I am willing to read. I do educate myself about things going on in the world. I don't need to post about it. I personally don't feel the need to post about it. I don't feel the need to publish my views. Right? Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But it's essentially, I don't like the idea of being judged. Right? Because I was, you know, even verbally judged about not posting the blackout, post on Instagram.
I don't think you need to.
Right,
that's what I said.
I don't feel like I never felt as if I needed to, and I know people who I looked through my feed that day, and I saw a few names down there.
And I was like,
you cannot, you are not capable of doing that, because I know the person you are, and you make people feel very uncomfortable because of your views, right? And so you posting that is clearly just a way for you to publicize something that you're not, right? And if that's how much merit this square is having, then I don't need it to prove anything.
I think the other problem is that even for you to realize I don't need to post anything, for you to yourself, it's fine. But I think even if it's not addressed explicitly, there is this pressure when you see everyone doing it to feel crap. Am I doing something wrong? Or and I think that for me, that's where PC culture creeps in. That it's these grand gestures of meaninglessness. I don't mean anything. That you suddenly feel the pressure to do and conform, and that's what I mean by disagreeing with the majority.
Yeah.
But again, I saw some people post White Lives Matter, and they were getting death threats, and people were reporting it. I was like, whoa, wait a second, guys.
Yeah.
It's their opinion. It may be incorrect what it stands for, but I think, it's better to address it, whoever their friends, family are, explain to them, have a conversation. Don't just shut them up completely and try and get them to lose their uni places and whatnot.
Well, I mean, there was that incident with, there was that, I think he was 14 years old, and he quoted, like a meme with the N-word on Twitter or something, and he was immediately in the spirit of the movement. He was like destroyed, right? As in like torn apart. Both his parents lost his job. He was doxxed, right? Which is illegal for a start, but more importantly than that, it's like a big deal, right?
What is that, sorry?
So it's like where someone's phone number, address, the school they go to is all published online, and they're shamed online for it. And in this instance, it can really like ruin someone's lives. And is that really, if you think of what you're trying to achieve, right? You're trying to achieve for as many people as possible to understand your viewpoint, right? To be accepting of who you are. Is this person going to grow up thinking, wow, those people who ruined my life, I really like support them now, or are they going to create more hatred? This is why hatred
pushes it underground.
Yeah,
and they may conform, but very, very reluctantly.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's healthy.
That's not healthy, because
the moment they're allowed to express their true feelings without consequences, that's when bad things happen, in my opinion. I was speaking to a friend about this as well, and I think that social media has these huge paradoxes and like contradictions, in that you can have a man convicted of murder posted online about him being a murderer or whatever, that will then receive death threats from someone else, i.e. threatening murder, for the same thing. And you'll see, someone's taking a picture next to a dead animal. You'll say, you read the comments, oh, I want them to be hung as well, shoot them as well. And I'm thinking, wait a second, guys, you don't even know if they've killed the animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that photoshopped? Have they done it? You know what I mean? And I think people need to be really careful of it, because there is a lot of hate out there online. And personally, my view with, especially these incidents of Black Lives Matter recently, if someone's done something illegal, leave it to the police. If they haven't, go about educating them. I don't think it's on you to ruin their life, school, job, parents' job, etc.
I don't think it's good for your cause either.
I don't think it achieves very much. And I think people have to be so careful about the naming and shaming in person. And I know that there can be this, as with any argument, this emotional attachment to it. You feel it's personal, you want them to suffer in the moment, but in the grand scheme of things, again, looking at consistency, I don't think it's healthy for anyone. I don't think it's on society, in terms of its citizens, to punish people. I think leave it to the judicial system if they violated it that way.
I guess the problem that people then find is that the justice system doesn't properly do the right things in punishing or feeding people the right consequences for their actions.
And again, I think first of all we should be looking at rehabilitation as the central focus.
100%.
And second of all, if that's the case, we need to reform the judicial system, not make someone lose a job. And again, is making you lose your job the most productive outcome here? Have your views changed? Would you do the thing again? And do I feel better? But have I changed it?
I mean,
probably
not to be that guy to go like look at the stats and statistics, but we know that the current system works like in such a way that it doesn't help what you're trying to achieve. Our idea of crime and punishment, our justice system, our prison system, causes reoffending. We know that doesn't occur.
We have the highest rates in Europe.
We know that doesn't occur when there is a focus on rehabilitation. So what are you trying to achieve here? What's your goal? If your goal is to genuinely make society a safer place, then you better start doing the proven things to enact that change. Otherwise, you are being counterproductive. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Part of the issue as well, I think, on a really nitty-gritty level, is if you look at policing, so we take the war on drugs, it comes down to, I'd say, conflict of interest and complement of interest. If you measure how successful a task force is in the war on drugs by the number of arrests, you immediately have a conflict of interest, because when drugs are not circulating, the task force is under pressure to get arrests, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. To fill quotas.
Yeah, to fill quotas and so on. And so you'll end up with large amounts of injustice there. And when the task force is doing well, your problem's at its highest.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the aim should be to have no arrests.
Yeah.
As opposed to having as many as possible. And I think it's those kind of things that just mean that systematically you're always going to have an issue. Yeah.
Now, I guess like with all of this, the only issue is the reason that these things exist. I say, I don't understand why that's the case, but it's obvious, right? Like the reason that exists in that format is because the people who are responsible for change benefit from things staying the same.
Yeah.
Right? So where can we see these changes come from? Because they're not going to come from the people who've continually benefited from them staying the same. Right? And so I think that there's, unfortunately, with the idea of I think PC culture probably ruins a lot of this, but the more people who are able to use these new age media platforms to voice their opinions, the more that we are allowing for power to be converted from the top to back down to the people to really represent what is definitively a democracy, right? And the more that we see these figures who are, let's say, less conventional, speak out and speak up on social media or media platforms in general, the more the power shifts, and I think the more things change.
And again, I slightly disagree with that, because I think it subscribes to the view that social media is individuals creating the news as opposed to corporations. But what you actually have is a lot of corporations invest a lot of money into social media accounts, sponsored postings, sponsored captions, to create agendas on social media. Blackout Tuesday, in my opinion, if we talk about patient zero, I don't think it was one individual that wasn't related to any organisation that decided, this is a great idea. I'm sure it was somewhere a little bit higher up. If you look at a lot of social media movements and #MeToo and all that stuff, I feel that there's a lot, probably we don't realise it, a lot of higher players that actually influence what we decide to post.
Which I know, I mean, if you look at the way that political campaigns are run,
with the Cambridge Analytica
and the way that Facebook has convincingly manipulated so many people in the way that they vote for so long, and the way that we currently have no control over where our data is being used, right? Or who is it being sold to, right? You have a better understanding of how the things we access online really may not be coming from such genuine places as I would probably like to think, right? And I do get that. But I do believe that out there in the world are people who have the capabilities to challenge conventional media, to challenge the way that our society is being run. And I think that although it's hard for them to get recognition or a platform because, think about it, right? YouTube, owned by Google, right? Google, again, a business, right? A massive fucking corporation.
Censor whatever they
want. And their priority is advertisement. So if there are things that their advertisements don't agree with, everything's controlled by the money there, right? So if advertisers aren't willing to advertise particular viewpoints, then those viewpoints are not going to be expressed, right? They're not going to be so popular with the platform. I think probably one of the best, although they're slipping, is Twitter. I think Twitter have one of the most open forums for discussion. However, we've seen recently people are being kicked off Twitter, and I don't like it because it just feels to me as if the more we censor the conversations that people are having, the more we break down the opportunities to change what feels so solid.
I agree with that. That we need to be careful with it. But at the same time, I think it is kind of inevitable. A bit like the running for president, that of course if you need funding to run for president and the funding comes from interest groups, that the interest groups they're represented there, you're not going to change on those issues. The gun lobby, for example, is like a great one with all the school shootings, that you're not going to have any change there because the person's only come there because of the gun lobby. And I think that in terms of solutions, so one of my things as well is solutions are problems. I feel like people are happy to vent on social media, but rarely, especially you see I'm just bait, just talking and getting people angry. Rarely you see a solution posed. I think part of the solution to it is that we need to recognise that within capitalism, money creates power, and I think we need to undo that slightly. And make it so that, if MPs were paid more, maybe more people would aspire to become MPs,
But then you're feeding into the idea of money and materialism that I don't necessarily like to cohere to. I don't like the idea. In fact, the way I view it, there should be in it a higher incentive to change the world, right, and to provide solutions. But the incentive, I wish, didn't have to be monetary.
I don't think it has to be monetary, but right now, I feel that given the maligning on social media, some will speak out about the gun lobby, they'll create some dirt, rape allegations, and you find out they quoted this when they were 15 or whatever, I feel like right now, the idea of promoting real change comes with the consequence of your life being kind of ruined in a way, as opposed to receiving the benefits of it. I feel that we need to change that and have change comes with positive consequences as opposed to negative ones. I feel that most people are scared to speak out on certain issues because they know that they will be destroyed by it. Whether politically or otherwise, And I think you need to change that first and foremost, as well as the capitalism money thing. But at the end of the day, we do live in a capitalist society. If I've got enough money, I can pay someone to, create a Twitter feed and for you to receive it, And I think that's always going to be the case. So I think that the incentive will, in some way, have to be monetary. To start off, anyway.
That's what I think is true. I'm okay, thank you. Although it does look
it's very nice.
I can
just finish this. It's so dank. With that much water as well, I'm so surprised. It tastes like that dragon fruit smoothie.
Dragon fruit smoothie.
It was like dragon fruit vitamin water that was around back in the day. I don't know if you've heard it.
Oh my god.
It's fruit juice, isn't it?
Dude, that's like sweeter than fruit juice.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I'm getting that like every time. It's expensive. Alright.
Back with the capitalism money thing.
It's so good. Back with the capitalism money thing. So today's sponsor.
No, just to wrap it up, I guess.
I think the idea that we are so determined that capitalism is a feasible way of operating society should be challenged more than it is. I'm not saying that we have to completely convert the system that we're living in, but we definitely have to challenge it and question it. And there are ways in which capitalism can work. I like Andrew Yang. I like that his kind of ideology of human capitalism. Capitalism where the priority is still, monetary and financial, but it puts human life first, and it's possible.
What does it look like on an issue that I'm not aware of?
For example, the promotion of universal basic income, right? Which I like the idea of. I don't, necessarily believe that there is a set way that it can either be an extremely successful project or an extreme failure, but I still think that somewhere in the avenue of providing people with a bit of financial support, and the way that I view the benefit system, for example, is definitely that it provides, more advantages than disadvantages. And I'll always be, a supporter of those causes. And that, I think, is like the lights attracted a few buddies. And I've always thought that's something. All right, don't be scared. It's just a moment.
That's good.
I do think that it's a means of addressing a problem that America has. I mean, he was running for president, Democratic leader, but stuff like that. The idea that capitalism can work, and so can a bit, as you say, like untie a little bit of how tight and strict we follow capitalism.
I think as well, what you're touching on is, I think the idea that we're born into a society and we assume it's correct and it's the best one, and it's really not. I don't think. I remember hearing one about China and their system and how we always talk China's bad, and what they've done well is that to reach I don't know if it's president, prime minister, their leader, you have to go through all these stages of politics, which means that you have to be extremely competent by the time you reach there. Technically, the PM could be a person who decided they wanted to do, get into politics, and a year later, 2 years later, be running the country.
I mean, look at Trump. It's
and I just think it's a lot of responsibility. When you're in charge of X 100 million people, put on an individual given no experience prior.
Yeah.
I mean, given we give doctors so much intense medical training and whatnot because it's important. I think politics is an area as well. When in terms of legislation, you're changing people's lives a lot, and a lot more than they realise.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those where we have a lot of problems with our political system, and until you recognise those and change those, it's really going to, some of the issues we see are just going to persist.
Yeah. And this is why I like the idea of a system in which experts in fields are the ones, because the way that like in our country, right, the way that the cabinet is sorted, the way that it shuffles around, means that someone who knows fuck all about education or about health or the NHS can suddenly be put as health minister, can suddenly be put as education minister. And what's that? 3 months later there's a shuffling, and you're now in charge of like home affairs or foreign affairs. So you're now an expert in foreign affairs. Why were you the education minister 2 years ago? Right? So I'd much prefer the idea of creating a system in which people who know what the fuck they're doing in certain areas are the ones in charge of those areas.
I agree with it in the general sense that we need people who are competent in the positions, but I also think first of all the problem with politics is that the right thing to do depends on who you are. For someone earning a high income, having a high tax rate is obviously bad. For someone earning you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think as well the idea that experts are not biased, I think, is a very, very difficult one. That they also have their own agendas. Sure. They've come from a place, we're talking about backgrounds and what their parents think. They've come from a place where, yes, they're informed about the ideas, but the idea that they hold themselves isn't necessarily the best for everyone else.
Yeah, but it's still, there can be a middle ground achieved where you're not putting people who don't know anything about what they're in charge in, putting them in charge, right?
True.
I do think that there's a system in which you can find a better fit for, Home Secretary than someone who doesn't have experience in that field.
Agreed.
Right? Now, as like a personal thing, something that I think, should be maybe adopted, should be maybe thought of. You were talking about increasing the pay of MPs, let's say, right, to ensure, or people who work in politics, to ensure that they are incentivized to go into that field.
I think as well, if you make something attractive, so if you look at footballers' wages, you'll have a larger amount of people trying to get there, which means you'll have a large amount of candidates to choose from, so competency will go up anyways. Yeah, that's the kind of view.
I think that there's an argument for the opposite. I think that I would, if I was and this is something that I would do probably, to be completely honest, like 80% I would do for the publicity of it and for the message of it than what I'm actually doing.
Yeah.
But I would ensure that my wage aligns with the average wage of the country that I am operating in. The reason for that, right, is because I believe that it is my responsibility as someone who runs the country to increase the standard of living, right? Now, if I, as an MP, have a higher standard of living than the average person that I am attempting to, govern, then I don't feel as if there's an incentive while in power to change much. However, if I am someone who, let's say, I am on the average wage of the area that I am, let's say, a member of parliament for, then I would be incentivized while in power to increase the standard of living of the people in my area in order to also increase my standard of living. So if that involves something like average wage, creating jobs in my area would mean that there is an incentive, a personal incentive, because I don't think I think a lot of people go into politics for themselves, right? I think the majority of people, unfortunately, have ulterior motives in politics,
Sure.
right? And until we can find a way to cut down as many of those as possible, people will always have these ulterior motives, and they're always going to fight for themselves, in my opinion.
I think the argument against the standard of living, I see what you're getting at. I think the two problems with it are, one, that just because you're an MP, let's say, of a wealthy area, it doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you shouldn't care or shouldn't be legislating for the country in general.
That's true, yeah.
And I think the second part is, if, let's say, the average wage in your area was extremely low, I think it may impact on your ability to do your job.
Okay.
So we're talking about, you may need a laptop for work, you may need a nice phone, you may need a car, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The average running costs of being an MP and being an effective one may not be in line with the wage that you're talking about.
Yeah, I do. But then, again, I still have a problem with people who, I don't think MPs need private cars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that candidates need private planes, or I don't like the idea of, if I was ever in Parliament, it would bother me that I am not being representative of how the average person lives. And if I'm being chaperoned in an expensive fucking Mercedes around central London, and I was going to these, luxurious restaurants, and I was in a luxurious house, I wouldn't feel like I'm properly representing the people of my country, because that's not how the people of my country. I would feel out of touch.
I think part of it is, I think you may be misunderstanding where some MPs come from, because I know there are some who are just regular people that live in the society.
Yeah.
And obviously there are some who will have that complete disconnect.
Yeah.
But I think you could also argue that just because you don't live like someone, it doesn't mean that you're unable to understand the challenges and what's needed for them.
Yeah, I get that. I do think that there are MPs who may be in positions where they are familiar with a certain standard of living, and I'm not saying that they are suddenly unable to represent the people just because they are not living like the people. But I feel as if personally, and this, like I said, this is a decision I would make, right? That if I was so disconnected from the people that I was attempting to represent wholeheartedly, then I think I would come into a lot of struggles with representing them efficiently. And I also think that this is just another incentive for a lot more community-focused government, right?
I think true, but if you think about it, so let's say I'm the MP of a town or area, right? If I'm 60 years old, how am I going to know what's needed in schools necessarily,
Yeah.
Although the income may be the same, there are certain areas that I will not be able to partake in because of the other factors. I know that income is one way to do it, but
but there's still ways you can do that people can do better than what they're doing.
True. True.
Like I like, for example, you will see that some people are very disconnected from their areas and aren't very good at representing their areas. And I'm not even talking about, because I'm almost certain that there are a good amount of people in an area who do believe in their member of parliament as a representative force of their area. The problem is how it's possible to get things done past that point.
Yeah.
Even if an MP knows what's best for their constituency, what then is possible for them to do? It's clearly not as an efficient enough system as it could be.
Agreed.
To combat those problems that person might come into, right, or might find in their area. I think there's a lot of issues concerning the way that we publicise our country as a democracy, when in reality it's probable that it's not so clear cut, or I don't think that we can really argue for living in a democracy. I don't think that it's very consistent with the way that it's defined and the way that we practice it.
Yeah, I think, again, purest form of democracy, everyone votes on everything. That's just not going to happen, is it?
I mean, but it's done to a larger degree in places like Switzerland, where there's, basically around, I think, on average, 4 referendums a month. Now, I know...
It gets to the point, though, where I think that referendums here have specific meaning and importance because they don't happen often.
Yeah.
If we had to vote on every single piece, right, am I really going to come home after my day's work and think, oh, not another one, 2 years, 3 years down the line, Staffordshire want 12,000 bikes. Oh, really? Do I want that? Nah, I'll click vote, I think, again, in the nature of our generation, people will start doing stupid things, and I don't think that the average person necessarily is, we're talking about competency, qualified enough to vote or do things in their best interests.
So then, there's definitely an argument against democracy, if I can understand you correctly, right?
Yeah.
You're
total democracy, yeah.
You're arguing, You're arguing that it's inefficient to allow people to have such influence over what they believe is best for them, when in reality there are people who have a lot more knowledge in those areas that can be making those decisions
and may actually do better for them than they would themselves.
But then surely as an end goal, once the issues of incompetence can be addressed with a more fundamentally accessible and just greater education system, the end goal is to advocate that idea of a more pure democracy. Or do you not think that's possible?
I personally don't think that. So I think first of all, first past the post, in my opinion, is slightly. It's got its problems, I think.
Yeah.
Firstly, being that you're voting for the candidate and the party. I think they're slightly separate.
Yeah.
I may think one person is great for representing my interests, but I don't want their party to have the Prime Minister.
I think the greatest example of that is, I think her name is Lynn Featherstone. She's an amazing MP, always has been, but she's Lib Dem. And as soon as Lib Dem went down the drain, I mean, no one wanted to vote Lib Dem. She was by far going to be the best option for, I think it's Haringey, but by far the best option, right? But as soon as people don't want to vote for Nick Clegg, they're not going to vote for Lynn Featherstone, and then they end up with someone who's worse for their area. But you've got to decide what you're voting on. This is why voting on those things separately is definitely in my opinion as well, a better way of enacting democracy.
So I guess to answer it more specifically, I think to improve it on like a fundamental level, political positions should have you need more qualifications and more training time to actually get there.
Yeah.
So again, to take the China example, they have some constituencies, areas economically that are larger than the UK. You have to manage your way up from small villages to towns to big towns, etc., 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 until you get to that top position, by which you have understanding of economics and so on. And beneath you, if you have problems yourself, you have other people that have, instead of being 40 years where you are, they've still spent 30 years doing the job. They can still, you have a safety fallback.
Yeah.
Instead of me coming off the street and saying, yeah, cool, I'll be, foreign minister or something.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very difficult. I think as well, like we were saying before, you need to extract funding and fund groups from the actual role.
Yeah.
And I think, although it's been done better, people on an individual level need to be more active in politics because it influences them. That again, we're often happy to rant or vent about the consequences of the legislation, but not very happy to offer solutions or think about what could actually be done instead.
Yeah.
And I think as well, we've got to, again, cut the government some slack in certain areas that, take Corona.
Yeah.
All these people have been, taken off work and so on. It's going to have devastating economic consequences. Yeah. And when crime goes up as a result of pure economics and cuts in policing happen, everyone's going to be saying, oh, Boris was terrible, when really, I'm not sure that anyone else in his position can do differently in that specific area. I'm not talking about everything in general yet. But I think people need to think about it in general and then come together and be, I think, more productive with it. Because now what I see happening is some people, not even everyone, votes for who they think would either represent their interest best or the party that would represent their interest best, and sometimes there's a conflict there.
Yeah.
And they leave them to go and do it.
Yeah. And that's all the involvement they have.
And then all that happens is they say, oh yeah, my life's improved or not, based on things that aren't even political, I've lost my job, oh, the government's crap, oh, I got a promotion, oh yeah, it's all really good, I love it, don't change anything.
Yeah.
Oh, the tax man's taking away this much, oh, I'm not getting any benefits, I think you're stuck in these weird contradictions that you could have a bit more involvement in to help change, but you don't.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do get where you're coming from in regards to how that would be how there is, I think, we definitely both agree on that. There's a better way of representing people.
And I also think
a democracy.
With the China example, opinion polls are separate from what the government has to do. So if we look at the Brexit referendum being advisory, what 52% of the people think is the case or would be happy to do, or you say, are you happy with what's going on? Just because people say it doesn't mean that legislation has to change in one way or another. It's just measuring government feedback in terms of how people feel.
Yeah.
And as well, with legislation, the effects of it take a long time. A cut in education now will have an effect 10 years, 12 years down the line. It means that right now the legislation we're judging is probably from 2 governments ago.
And this is the
and
weird
it's really
thing.
weird.
These kind of the idea that things can change so quickly means that we're always dissatisfied.
Yeah.
We're always dissatisfied because people, governments, prime ministers, parties aren't able to follow out their plans because as soon as you look at something like Obamacare comes into fruition, it had a few years, and yes, Obama had 2 terms, but a few years of practice, right? And these systems take decades to develop to a place where they're efficient, where they're affordable, where they're worth it. As soon as it starts, loads of money's funneled into it, an entire politician's career is funneled into it, and then 4 years later, a new person comes in and scraps the whole fucking thing. It makes the decisions in politics redundant. And I think that there should be legislation about how certain projects need to be carried out past a politician's leadership.
I think there are a couple problems with it though. Is one being that there will be some clear decisions throughout time that need to be revoked ASAP, which wouldn't be the case if you allowed that. And 2 being, I think politics is one of those strange areas where it's hard to test things if you take, let's say, football managers, you can test it in training, you know?
Yeah.
You take song, you know, what do you call them? Singers. And comedians.
Singers,
you could test them in a private audience and see how people react to them.
Yeah.
With politics, even in the universal income thing where they tried it in Scandinavia, they try it in a small community. If it works, it's immediately unfair. If it doesn't work, it's immediately unfair.
Yeah.
And you're still playing with people's lives.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those where there is no testing ground for it. You know, maybe you could get some amazing computer system in the future that will see how things go, but it's very, very difficult.
And I think that you can't even use like the example of it working in other places. So I mean, that's not even an efficient way, because everyone will always argue it working, that we're a different country, we operate differently, that what works there won't work here, and sometimes that's the case. So you know, you have a situation where you're right, there isn't, I never really thought about it like that, but there really isn't much grounds for testing things in politics.
And it does create this really strange kind of environment where you want to employ lots of policies, yes, because they sound revolutionary and great.
Yeah.
In reality, will they be?
Yes.
And there's no way to test that until they happen.
Yeah.
At which point we will judge them, as you say, before the effects are actually felt. And it's a really, really strange one.
So do you think that, I mean, it sounds as if you don't have much, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but could it be that you don't have a very strong belief in politics being the answer to the problems that we have? Or do you think it is capable of providing solutions to the things that we're facing nowadays?
I think it's capable of providing solutions, but we need to make sure that certain issues, such as the competence thing we've been talking about, people's engagement, satisfaction, the difference between what the individual wants and what they need, is sorted out beforehand.
Yeah.
You know? I think as well, obviously, we're talking about individuals' lives. The tax rate doesn't affect everything to do with my life. My life isn't purely monetary, there's family issues, whatnot, everything to do with culture. And the government isn't necessarily in control of all of that.
Yeah.
I think politics can affect our lives a lot, significantly. But again,
it's not the be-all.
Yeah, it's not the be-all and end-all, and we need to work as a community, as individuals, as friends, family, whatever, to sort out the other issues in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the way I put it.
Now, you mentioned, which I think we'll end on, which was coronavirus, and about how, you know, Boris Johnson may have, you know, there's not really much, you know, there's arguments that you can make for why he made massive mistakes, and how, unfortunately, if we'd gone into lockdown a week earlier, we could have saved loads and loads of lives. Maybe that was a decision that was wrong or right, but there's no way of knowing, right? There's no way of testing these things. Also, we know that because of the way that the media works and the news cycle behaves, that all of the things that we are currently blaming Boris Johnson for, when it comes to re-election, which is, you know, quite far away, you know, years away,
the screens went black, I just wanted to...
That's fine. Are we capable of remembering and holding him to account for these mistakes or non-mistakes that he's made? But let's separate ourselves from politics for now. On a personal level, right? How has coronavirus, something which was just so spontaneous, how has it impacted your life? And do you think that it has been do you think it has been positive or negative?
So on a day-to-day, like for me, again, I said I just stayed with my parents for most of it, for the first 8 weeks or so on. Wasn't really bad. I mean, I got loads of uni work done, been quite productive. I remember speaking to quite a few people.
Yeah.
It's been alright.
Okay.
I don't know personally of people that have died from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me personally, it's not too bad.
Yeah.
I think for me as well, in terms of how it shaped my view, I think it's made me realise again the disconnect that we have between the information and us reporting it. Yeah. That I think there's so much misinformation and people aren't really sure, including Boris himself. I remember people saying, again, both valid arguments, that one, it's in the government's best interest to underplay the figures, but then on the other side, it's also, I heard at the start, it's in their best interest to overplay it because it scares us into action.
Yeah.
I think as a society, we've almost forgotten the idea that people can die of things that aren't coronavirus, and people can die with coronavirus but not having been killed by it.
Yes.
I know there's lots of cases where people have the virus, yes, but they died of a heart attack, but it's reported as a coronavirus death. But I also know the other side where, people clearly died of it, but it's not reported. So I think even there, in terms of if I am the Prime Minister, what do I do? I think there's a bit of, obscurity. Does he know? Did the health ministers know?
Yeah.
Does anyone really know?
And I understood when, Donald Trump recently got into a lot of hot water for saying something which there's a lot of things I will criticise Donald Trump for. But this is something which I kind of understand, but especially because he's a businessman, so he understands these kind of things in a different way. If he is extremely efficient with testing, and he rolls out a scheme to test in the most efficient manner possible with the highest number of tests per person than any other place in the world, it will make America look worse. Because the more people you test, the more people are tested positive. And no one cares about the test rates. Those aren't the graphs you see.
True.
So Donald Trump understands that if he goes out of his way to test things more efficiently than other countries and not, underplay values or to he criticizes China for not providing real stats, but then, he's going to be compared with other countries poorly if they decide to test more efficiently, which is just another example of where the priority is no longer in the best interest of the people, but is instead to do with image and power and ensuring that he keeps his reputation. And it just seems so misdirected. And you're right about the misinformation. I think that, if anything, the confusion that we have experienced as a result of people that we've clearly put too much trust into to making us feel like we should be, understanding. I mean, we have experts who are, against each other and opposing views on certain things, and the way that the media portrays things is obviously going to be misconstrued, right? And we need to be more careful, independently of the information that we consume, because otherwise we are going to be vulnerable to manipulation and to misinformation.
Well, with social media, I could go on Instagram right now and say, did you know the government's lying to you? There's been 300 million corona deaths worldwide. And someone, somewhere, out of all the followers, is going to be, right, I'm going to repost that or tell my mum or whatever. They're going to go, wow, you'll never believe it, what the government's up to, right? And I just think it's one of those where everyone's scared because they don't know, but the variety of reactions it produces is really strange. You can walk down the street now and see someone that's young, in the healthy age group, concerned about dying from it, and someone that's extremely vulnerable saying it's a complete myth and the government trying to control you.
Yeah.
And I just think it's one of those where it's just odd.
Yeah.
And I almost don't blame presidents or leaders because of all the mixed information they're receiving.
Yeah.
And given, again, the long incubation period, it's only after, so the first case happens, right? It's only after 2 months that you know whether or not the person, how lethal it is. You need all these stats to work out the percentage of people that die from it, how infectious it is, and it changes all the time, mutates and so on. I think it's a very, very strange position. I do think, obviously, it could have been handled better, but I also think, and interestingly, I think that people need to take more individual responsibility. In that a lot of people I know will happily go out and do things and go to motives and whatnot, but then will say, oh, the government hasn't managed it well, look at these people that have died. Yeah. But I think if you believe strongly that this is a risk to people you know in the country and your health, then make sure that you take it on yourself. You don't need the government to tell you, they're not your parents, to stay inside. Yeah.
And definitely express the viewpoint that you are living. I do not go out, 2 months ago, I know people who are very willing to go out, meet people, this is the height, this is coming towards the peak of infection, right? Willing to go out, see people, break the rules, and then stand there on a Thursday at 8 p.m. and clap the NHS.
Yeah.
And I cannot stand it because it's just so, it's such a contradiction, right? Now, personally, at this point, I'm definitely more relaxed. I can say I've broken the restrictions and the lockdown rules, but I've also had my moments of responsibility, right? And I think that I'm not going to sit here and act as if Boris Johnson has, in some way, with some ulterior motive, decided to make this worse for our country. There is no doubt in my mind that Boris Johnson, with this, even if his motive was completely to do with remaining in power, he still is looking to reduce the numbers of people. There's no way that there's a sinister idea that the government is trying to control us more by using coronavirus as a means to do so, or that they are trying to, handle things badly on purpose, or that they don't care, right? I completely believe that Boris Johnson cares, and I don't think that it's fair to say that everything that's taken place is his fault. Right.
Interesting. I don't think that in the classic conspiracy way, the government trying to control us, but I do think from the outset that something doesn't feel right with me about the whole situation.
Interesting.
Just personally. Even from conflicts about where it started, to how it spread, to the numbers, to everything, to lockdown measures. I just think there's, for me anyway, I think something slightly weird's going on. I think first of all it directs people's attention away. We forgot about Brexit. No one cares about police cars. No one cares about all the other issues. Yeah. All of our foreign policy stuff going on in the Middle East, no one cares about anymore. Because every single news cycle, 24/7 now, is corona, corona, corona. And I think as well, if you look at the actual amount of deaths per year, this is the other thing I didn't realise. Given the UK is roughly 60, 70 million people, yeah, we actually have quite a few people that die every week.
Yeah.
Coronavirus, although it's reported they're corona deaths, the actual number of people that die every week, in my opinion, from what I've seen anyway, hasn't gone up dramatically.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's just a case that we're able to label, if we're talking about some people who were in intensive care, right? Who were in hospital where they were, their survival rates were extremely low. Now, instead of labeling their death as the reason that they entered the hospital, they are immediately diagnosed with coronavirus, and then they are contributing towards those numbers. Karen.
I think I was going to say immediately, obviously looking at things from a statistical viewpoint relegates people's lives to statistics. Every one you see is a number of people that have had to, lose a loved one, funerals, you've left children behind, whatnot. It's terrible. But I also think on a very broad viewpoint, I get this strange feeling that coronavirus is used as more of a distraction and is over-reported to the actual danger it poses to us.
Of course.
And it's called this weird mass hysteria that has manipulated stock markets to do weird stuff, and the cost of hand sanitizer and toilet roll, I just think it's really, really strange. Yeah. And I'm not sure even if people could have predicted this because of how erratic behaviour's been.
Yeah.
But I just think something doesn't really sit right with me.
But that happens a lot when I see these kind of issues. I mean, how about this, right? Because I think we should wrap this up. Right, I've got an idea. Okay, just a little exercise to end it, right? I'll bounce a conspiracy off you to do with coronavirus, right? And you just give me literally true or false. Okay, you're not allowed to go into it.
I'm not allowed to go middle.
No. Oh no, you're not allowed to go middle. Okay. It's either real and you wholeheartedly believe it.
That's gonna make me sound like a madman, though, isn't it? Because I'm gonna find it hard to deny some of these.
Say fine. Okay. Yes, no, or
scale of 1 to 10.
All right, scale of 1 to 10.
10 being completely true.
Okay.
0 being no way.
Considering China's media attention concerning the concentration camps, what are the chances that it was a distracted outbreak purposefully intended to divert the world's attention from problems in China?
4.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Purely because from a Western perspective, we don't like China anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Media-wise, if there's any problem in China from the president having a bad haircut or whatever, we report on it.
The poo or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. The idea that there is a cure for or a vaccine or a means of moderating coronavirus that isn't being released because it will later have monetary value.
8.
Yeah.
I know, I've seen, again, I don't know how much of this information about, but I've seen some people, like the health minister, having a company to do with vaccines and the whole Bill Gates thing, and I think it's really, really suspicious.
Yeah.
And again, my mum works in the NHS and she keeps telling me how the number of vaccines for kids, newborns, even in the womb, has gone up from something like 4 to 20 or 30, but the number of disease deaths, you know, has actually stayed the same or even gone up. And I just think, it's a very strange business. And the whole idea of vaccination passports, that it forces you to get it.
Yeah.
And I really, personally, being in a low risk age group, I don't really want to take anything.
Yeah.
It takes 2 years for vaccines to be properly checked. If this is one done in 6 months, I don't know the effects in, you know.
The NHS track and trace app that is being encouraged to download on your phone is using your data, your location data, your phone's data, and the permissions that you allow that app to have access to in malicious manners for the government's use.
7. Or no, in fact, probably 9.
Okay.
No, I think any app. If you look at the permissions from a, Angry Birds that wants to listen to your calls and
of course,
it will get sold.
Okay. Last one.
Okay.
Apple. I don't know if you saw this in my story. Apple are behind coronavirus as a means to promote the convenience of AirPods over headphones while wearing a face mask.
3.
They would do it though.
This is the thing. I agree, they would do it, but I think it's such a strange investment.
Yeah. Because they haven't really promoted it as such.
And also, hypothetically, the reason I'm against this whole it's been designed in a lab kind of thing is because diseases mutate, you could accidentally wipe out a lot of people, including yourself, the designer.
Yeah.
Unless you've developed an antidote with it. I just think it's a very strange undertaking for commercial means. Yeah.
So you think, if I'm getting this straight, you think that it has bred from very natural phenomenon, but is being used and manipulated as everything else is, as a means for power and information.
Yeah, I think it's just a natural cause. For me, natural causes, the extent to which the outbreak's been controlled, I'm not sure on. I just think it's being used to divert, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And bring us. If you look at clapping for the NHS, for example, it creates a sense of nationalism and reminds us of the wartime. Does it solve anything? Not really. Unless you live next to a hospital so they can hear you clapping. You're literally just clapping outside your house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the NHS heroes, all the language used, it brings us together. We forget about Brexit. We forget about all the things dividing us.
We forget about paying NHS staff properly.
Yeah. I just think there's so many things where you just got to think about it logically and think, wait a second. Yeah. But again, given the age and the things people are capable of, such as the Cambridge Analytica scandal, it wouldn't surprise me too much if it was some huge nefarious plan, but I'm going to keep my boots, a bit more grounded.
All right.
Cool.
Fair enough.
Pleasure.
I think we'll call it there.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I'm all about actually. It was really fun. Good stuff, man.
That's good. I like that.
This is
It's lethal.
I didn't want to say anything, but it's like it tastes. I don't know. It doesn't taste like a fruit I've ever had either. So it doesn't.
Crazy, isn't it?
You said it's like passion fruit thingy. It doesn't.
Yeah,
I tell you what, it doesn't taste like the two fruits that are on
it's
the
so
bottle
true.
But no, it's pear. Yeah.
I made this uni drink. If you ever need it.
Oh no.
Oh my.
Oh, I'm not gonna lie.